You know what today is? Today is a day when we get to talk about games from a professional sports league in this country that actually happened and actually meant something. My heart's beating. Like, I'm excited about it. We have two baseball games to talk about. Like, ones that actually have something to do with the ultimate outcome of Major League Baseball this season. How awesome is that? This is the JMULL Show. Thank you so much for joining us on a Friday. It's the end of the week. Hopefully you're getting through your Friday fine and dandy, almost to the weekend. Hopefully it's going by nice and quickly so that we can get out of here for the week. Whether you're watching at 110sportsmedia.com/live or on twitch.tv/the JMULL Show, thank you so much for making us a part of your day. Before I set the agenda, the other thing I want to say is I'm not a huge fan of Seattle's new NHL franchise name, the Kraken. It's, you know, on the Jays for Days podcast yesterday while we were recording, Mr. Josh Doring made a very good point that the Kraken is like one thing, but it's a team of individual players. It's a little bit off-putting, but I will say this. And it just kind of feels like it screams expansion team, and I know that's what it is. And you know, if they're around for 50 years, then it'll be like, oh yeah, they just feel like a hockey team. But it's a little weird to say, well, tomorrow the Penguins are hopping on a plane because they're gonna go over to Seattle and play the Kraken. That makes me laugh. But the logo's kind of dope. I like the colorway, and it certainly is. There's a world out there for the marketing that you can do with a name like the Kraken. And I've seen it on Twitter, and it's exactly right. If you call the fan base anything other than the Crackheads, you're doing it wrong. But that's all I'm going to say about hockey today. Going to set the agenda real quick for you at 11:20ish. Our good friend from 110Sports, Chris Brown, is going to come and talk baseball, everything about opening day, the playoff expansion, baseball's response, and the way they stood with Black Lives Matter last night. We're going to talk about all of those things at 11:20. 11:40, the podium, we're modifying the podium a little bit today and turning it into my 2019-20 NBA awards. Not predictions, more just who I think should win those awards. And then we'll get some FYI going before we get out of here for the weekend. It should be a good show, but we're going to talk to Chris about a lot of baseball at 11:20, but that's actually where I want to start today because there are games to talk about, and that makes me happy. So we're going to take advantage of the fact that there are games to talk about. We're going to do that right now. You know, I think it's pretty clear after last night why the Dodgers and the Yankees are considered the two best teams in baseball. And I know it's one game apiece, but the way that these games happened, it's pretty easy to see why these teams are considered to be so good, and why, you know, it's been a while since we've had two teams that are so clearly far and away the best teams in their respective leagues. I mean, I guess the Twins are a little closer and the Astros are a little closer to the Yankees than anybody in the NL is. But still, you're not going to find anybody who's picking anybody other than the Dodgers to win their division. And you're going to find very few people who are picking right now anybody other than the Dodgers to make it to the World Series and represent the National League. And the same can be said for the Yankees. Chris Brown actually has a different team, and I'll ask him about that at 11:20 here in about 15-20 minutes. But he actually has a different team other than the Yankees. But for the most part, the consensus is that the Yankees are the favorite. They are the favorite, and the consensus is that they will represent the AL in the World Series. And that's just, you know, nobody wants Dodgers-Yankees in a World Series more than Major League Baseball does, because that's, you know, with stars like Mookie Betts and Aaron Judge and Giancarlo Stanton, you got Garrett Cole and Clayton Kershaw. Like, that World Series would have the would have a chance to be the most watched World Series ever. Because that brings in every casual baseball fan. It doesn't matter who you're a fan of. If you're a casual baseball fan at all, you're going to watch that series. So nobody wants that more than baseball. But after last night, I think it's clear why these teams are considered the two best in baseball. And let me explain. So on the Yankees side of things, Giancarlo Stanton and Aaron Judge were responsible for all 4 runs. And what's scary about last night is that the bottom of the order was responsible for 2 of those runs. The bottom of the order for the Yankees was getting on base last night. And if the bottom of the order gets on base, then Aaron Judge in particular, but Giancarlo Stanton as well, they're never going to hit without anybody on base. That's where things get really scary, in my opinion, if they've always got guys on base. I mean, the Yankees lineup doesn't exactly have a weak spot, but if you were going to pick which part of the lineup you'd most like to face, it would be the bottom 3 in the lineup. You know, you got Luke Voit and then Urshela and Tyler Wade at the bottom of that lineup. Urshela and Tyler Wade, 2 of the 4 runs. Aaron Judge had the other because he was on base when Giancarlo Stanton hit his home run in the first inning. But if the bottom of that Yankees lineup, like they did last night, is getting on base, and Aaron Judge in particular is never hitting without runners on base, then this is really scary for everybody else. And then the other thing is, and the more obvious thing, is Garrett Cole made exactly 1 mistake last night. I know it was only 6 innings, but he made exactly 1 mistake last night. And it was a mistake that Adam Eaton sent over the fence, which is the only reason that the Nationals had a run last night. Garrett Cole didn't give up another hit in 6 innings. And then, after Cole, the Nationals are rewarded by getting to go up against James Paxton, who was 15-6 last season, with one of the more terrifying offenses in baseball behind him. That's the other thing. I mean, this pitching staff doesn't need to be lights out for them to win baseball games. They just need to be good. But they've got the arms to be lights out. And then you put a team, then you put a lineup behind them that is absolutely terrifying. And that's without LeMahieu. I mean, they weren't even completely healthy last night. I mean, that's even scarier. They didn't even have their starting second baseman. They're not even healthy completely yet. Now, of course, this is all with the caveat of can they stay healthy, and that's, of course, a fair critique and a fair reason to be skeptical because the Yankees haven't been able to stay healthy. But if they can stay relatively healthy compared to how healthy they've been the past couple years, I mean, this is a team that still almost went to the World Series, and they spent a lot of the year without their best players. It makes a lot of sense, and it was exactly what you're going to see from the Yankees all year. You got elite starting pitching and a lineup that never gives you a chance to breathe. Judge and Stanton responsible for all 4 runs. At the center of that lineup, I mean, Gary Sanchez hits 7th in this lineup. 7th. And of course, he hasn't been consistently the hitter that he was when he sort of bursted onto the scene. But he's still dangerous and not a guy that I'd like to be having to go up against in number 6 in the lineup. Jeez. Like, really, in this lineup last night, there's exactly 1 inning, if you get it right, where you can really feel good about, okay, let's just get through this inning. Let's get a 3-and-out so we don't have to face anybody we're truly scared of. If you got Voit, Urshela, and Wade coming up in that inning, that's an inning that you really need to just go 3-and-out. Like, really badly, because that's the only breather you're going to get. And you're not going to get it for very long because LeMahieu's going to be back eventually. And then it's going to be even scarier. but elite pitching and a terrifying lineup is what you got out of the Yankees last night, and there's no reason to suggest that that's not what you're going to get for the entire season. On the other side of things, and it took the Dodgers a little while longer, but the Dodgers, in my opinion, looked even better once they got the bats going. I mean, it's a little scary that they sent a 22-year-old out to the mound in Dustin May, and they still won 8-1. I mean, May was solid. He was, shaky here and there, but that's to be expected from a 22-year-old. Ultimately, he gave up 1 run. That's not bad at all. And then they scored 7 runs in the 7th and 8th innings of this ball game, and it was over, just like that. And then you add it with the even more terrifying part that after May came out, after I think it was 4 1/3, I believe. Yeah, 4 1/3. He came out in the Dodgers bullpen, gave up 1 hit. And they gave up that 1 hit in the 9th inning. Scary. Every Dodger except the pinch hitter had a hit. Enrique Hernandez had 4 hits and 5 RBIs. They drove in 8 runs total. And Mookie Betts and Bellinger combined to go 1 for 9 from the plate. They were essentially non-factors. I mean, Mookie had a hit, and it ended up, I think it was a hit to lead off an inning or something, and it ended up turning into a run. So he made some sort of impact on the game. But Betts and Bellinger were not the reasons why. And Betts and Bellinger are MVPs in 2 of the last 3 seasons. 8 runs. None of them came from their biggest bats or their most terrifying bats. They still put up 8 runs, and their bullpen gave up 1 run in 5 2/3 innings. 4 2/3 innings. That's not good for the rest of Major League Baseball. I know the Giants aren't great, but it still looks mighty impressive in my opinion from the Dodgers side of things. I was quite happy that they ran away with it because I was ready to go to bed, and I was like, this is still 1-1 in the 7th inning. What's happening? And then they put a couple runs up on the board, and then they put 5 more runs up on the board, and I was able to go to sleep pretty confident that I wasn't going to miss anything else. Me not missing anything else is almost an understatement. Almost. So it makes perfect sense after one night. I can see it. It's not like it wasn't exactly stumbling out of the gate for either of these two teams. It was pretty impressive. The other thing is the cutouts look weird, like genuinely freaky. It works in soccer over in Europe because the camera angle is so wide that you can't see any details on the cardboard cutouts in those stands. And then they pump in the sound so the optics fit the sound, but you can't really see any. You can tell something's there, and so it makes it look a little better on TV. But with the camera angle, the game camera angle that's most dominantly on for baseball, the pitcher and the batter and sort of, watching every pitch, that camera angle is way too tight. And those cardboard cutouts not moving, you got people smiling right back at you the entire game. Like, if I was a pitcher, that's freaky. And it was a little off-putting on TV, in my opinion. I get it, and it makes the optics a little better. But it's also just a little weird because if you get that camera angle from one of the dugouts on the pitcher, you can tell that they're not around the entire stadium. They're just behind the home plate. It was a little off-putting. I'm not sure how I feel about it. It's certainly a little different from any wide angles that you can put anywhere else because it's just they're staring at you. They never move. They're smiling, and it's a little off-putting, but that's not really here nor there. I just had to comment on it. The other thing I want to touch on is clearly Major League Baseball paid A-Rod and ESPN because A-Rod was saying some suspect things. I mean, last night he called the Astros a sleeper, which isn't really, I'm sure Major League Baseball doesn't care about how they talk about the Astros, maybe a little bit. But he called the Astros a sleeper with the third best odds to win the World Series. And then this is where you really had everybody scratching their head. He complimented baseball for coming together on a season and basically said now they're the first team sport to come back, which is not true. First major sport to come back, first team sport to come back, and they really just came together as the owners and the players, and everybody should be really proud of baseball. What? We still didn't have a playoff format yesterday. We were like hours from first pitch, and we still didn't have a playoff format. Opening day was supposed to be like 4 months ago. And really all they did was take players out of the stands. Take fans out of the stands. It's different when the NBA has to figure out the logistics of an entire bubble. Baseball didn't change anything from a day-to-day operations thing. They just sort of messed with the schedule. Teams aren't traveling quite as much. And they took fans out of the place. That shouldn't take 4 months to put together. Instead, the players and the owners argued for 4 months. And then Manfred just made a decision because has the power to do that. There's nothing to congratulate baseball on. Congratulations. Manfred used his powers after nobody could come to a conclusion together. Congratulations. That's what's happened. Nothing else. And then to bring Manfred on to ESPN and talk about how great he is and ask him why his reign as the commissioner of baseball has been so positive and he's been such a popular commissioner. What? You just sound stupid. You just sound tone deaf and like you're not paying attention. But that was kind of the vibe from ESPN all night because, you missed the entire first batter of the Dodgers-Giants game. They cut to the game, and Yastrzemski was already on base. Mike Yastrzemski was already on base. What? What happened? And then in the second inning, they missed the first few pitches of that inning too. How do you do that? You got one job. One job. To just have the cameras rolling and to not be in commercial when the game actually starts. And they somehow managed to miss the first batter of one of the only 2 games on opening night. And it's not like they were having to cram in the Yankees game before the start of the Giants game. That would have been different. That would have been fine. Whatever. The Yankees and Nationals hadn't thrown a pitch in like an hour and a half because of the rain. They were literally sitting around. How do you sit around for that long and then be clearly caught off guard? That's what happened here. They were completely caught off guard by the start of one of the only 2 baseball games when everybody had been sitting around for 90 minutes twiddling their thumbs waiting for the next baseball game to start. That's a bad look. Real bad look, in my opinion. It's ultimately not that big a deal, but it's one of those things that's just so easy to get it right. So just get it right, you know what I mean? And then, of course, the other biggest news coming from baseball yesterday was 16-team playoff format. You got 8 teams in each league. The top 2 teams from each division are going to get in the playoffs. Then you have the 2 best records in the wild card from each league, and that makes up your 8. I believe in the first round, the 8 versus 1 is a 3-game series, something to that effect. Maybe it's the first round. It's a 3-game series, and all 3 games are played in the higher seeded teams ballpark to eliminate travel, so that, and it also makes the first round very quick so that you end up essentially in the same place that you do with just one wild card game, and that's with 4 teams on each side in the ALDS and NLDS rounds. So we'll talk to Chris about that, among other things. That's coming up next. Chris Brown from 110 Sports, at C Brown Sports on Twitter. He's great and has a lot of insight on Major League Baseball. So we'll talk to him next on the JMULL Show on 110sportsmedia.com. Welcome back to the JMULL Show on a Friday. We got baseball all weekend, and it's going to be awesome. So finally we got something to do on the weekend other than dive deep into whatever Netflix show we're watching. But to talk about Major League Baseball, opening day, some of the happenings of last night, the playoff format, it's our buddy from 110 Sports, Chris Brown, at C Brown Sports on Twitter. If you haven't followed him, he's a must follow. Chris, thank you so much for joining the show. How you doing, buddy?
Doing great, Josh. Great to be with you. We got baseball back, and that's always a good thing.
Absolutely. Tell me, am I crazy for thinking it's really obvious why the Dodgers and Yankees are clearly the best 2 teams in baseball after one night? Am I jumping the gun a little bit? Because I thought I thought it was really clear why they are considered the 2 best teams in baseball. Were you impressed by them last night or not so much?
I certainly was impressed by by both those teams last night. I mean, we saw a glimpse of what the Yankees are capable in that offense if Judge and Stanton are able to stay healthy. We saw the Dodgers lose their opening day starter in Clayton Kershaw, and then they're able to just call up a player who was going to go down to their taxi squad, who comes up, who's 22 years old, like you talked about, and who held his own in there with an opening day start. So we saw the Dodgers, we saw their offense succeed there eventually against the Giants, but we even saw their pitching depth on display. The fact that they had a pitcher who wasn't even slated to be in the opening day roster, able to come up and make an impact for them. The Yankees lineup, how great it can be. It's clear that these are two, many people believe in it. I think on paper it's hard to argue against the idea that these are the best teams in their leagues, and we did see that on display last night, I'd say.
Yeah, it took the Dodgers a little while longer, but then it was like in the seventh inning they remembered just how good they are, and then you had Enrique Hernandez with 5 RBIs, and you end up with a game that finished 8-1 with Bellinger and Betts going 1 of 9 at the plate, 1 for 9 at the plate, and everybody else being the contributors, which is just scarier considering that the scariest bats in that lineup went 1 for 9 last night.
Exactly. I mean, I mentioned that, the Dodgers pitching depth and calling up, an arm here there the last and Dustin May right before first pitch, but also we saw their hitting depth on display. I mean, a guy like Enrique Hernandez, I mean, not a name, not a big name. Obviously, this is a lineup full of big names, but even the smaller, contributors on that team, the backup players, the utility infielders, are significantly better than the players in those roles on other teams. They've got incredible hitting depth as well. It's going to allow them to, absorb whatever sorts of injuries or circumstances come their way to a large degree. And we saw that on display last night as well. It was really impressive.
Yeah, and then they had and then their bullpen gave up 1 hit, not 1 run, 1 hit in 4 2/3, which also is terrifying. I want to ask you about a couple different things from last night. First, just your thoughts on, it's one of the more intriguing conversations every time a league in this country comes back right now about how they're going to take a stand with Black Lives Matter and this push for racial equality and the ending of racial injustice in this country. And I think it's that baseball did it differently than any other league is going to do it, and I think that's how the battle, the conversation for each league. What were your thoughts on how Major League Baseball stood with Black Lives Matter last night and some of the things that they did before first pitch in both games?
Yeah, that was really interesting to see, and really powerful show of unity. It was not something I had, really expected. I hadn't really, honestly, wasn't really sure exactly what to expect, what the approach was going to be taken by the players, and it was really powerful to see that the full unity of every single player on those teams that played last night, taking a knee prior to the national anthem, with the video that was played. Morgan Freeman with the voiceover for a video of there, and it was really powerful to see the unity of those players kneeling prior to the national anthem, because I think that's of course been one of the aspects to all this has been, is this a unified front? How is it being handled by different players and by different teams, and what are the actions saying or not saying? But the fact that it was just so unified from the players was, I think, really powerful to see. And then, of course, you had during the national anthem, there were, I believe, a number of individual players, especially in that second game, Mookie Betts being one of the notable ones, as well as Giants manager Gabe Kapler and one of their players who kneeled during the national anthem as well. So it's going to be interesting to see how this develops throughout the season. But I thought just a really powerful display of unity by baseball in all those players kneeling prior to the national anthem last night.
Yeah, I thought one of the cooler images from last night was Mookie Betts kneeling and Max Muncy on one side of him and Cody Bellinger on the other, both each player with a hand on Mookie Betts' shoulder. Was also a very powerful image because unity on one side of things, but the other side of things is just it was a great example of how players, even if they choose not to kneel for the national anthem, can show support for and show allegiance with Black Lives Matter by putting their hand on Mookie's shoulder, even if they had decided that they weren't going to kneel themselves. I thought that was also a really powerful image of and an example of how you can stand for what the movement is fighting for, even if you decide not to kneel for the national anthem.
Yeah, exactly. I completely agree with you on that one. That was an extremely powerful image, just to see, Betts, making that decision to kneel, but also the players in Bellinger and Muncy supporting him while, not personally choosing to kneel, but expressing that support, like you said, a really, powerful way to show, solidarity with their teammate, with the cause, while also, making the decision that they personally feel is best to not kneel if that's what they choose, or kneel if that's what they choose. But just the idea, like you said, exactly, that there can be that support even if they're not taking the exact same action.
How'd you feel about A-Rod? He said some things I'm certainly skeptical about, from calling the Astros a sleeper to win the World Series to being real friendly and compliments and was full of compliments for Rob Manfred and baseball. How'd you feel about A-Rod, some of the things he said, and just in general how baseball, the production level from baseball, just this weird time with the commentators not being at the games themselves, being back in ESPN studios? What were your thoughts on the production and color commentating side of things from the telecast last night?
Yeah, it was interesting. I mean, just sort of starting with the telecast, production side, obviously the announcers, the producers working in the studio have some, kinks to figure out, but that's of course understandable. I'm sure it's an interesting experience calling a baseball game while not being there. And there's situations in that the second game last night, 3 announcers were in 3 different locations,
right,
none of which were the ballpark. So there was also the problem in the Nationals Yankees game. There was the weather coming in, which limited the amount of cameras they could have. So, there's clearly some things that are being figured out in the circumstances there. But I'm confident they'll figure that part out. As far as A-Rod, it was a bit of a mess. You pretty much covered it, in your first segment. But I mean, calling the Astros a sleeper, obviously that's like you said, the third highest odds to win the World Series. It's something to easily pick fun at him for. It's not anything horrible. I was particularly disappointed in how he handled the interview with Rob Manfred, because, like you said, those questions were so complimentary when, the reality is that this process to getting baseball back and going, we can't just ignore how messy that was, and right, how complicated, and how, the league and the players, the problems that were happening there. You also have a team in the Toronto Blue Jays that still does not have a home park to play on as the season is getting underway. And when I'm asking the commissioner about that, I feel like that was a disservice there. So I was disappointed, to say the least, in some of the things that A-Rod was doing last night.
Yeah, it raises the question now. Was there an exchange of hands in terms of money for that interview? Probably not, but I'm sure there was some sort of guidelines about, listen, if we're going to do this interview, you're not going to ask us the tough questions on opening night. This is going to be about the return of baseball, the celebration of it, which to a certain extent I understand, but I also think there's a way to ask those questions in a non-confrontational manner if that's what Manfred and the league were worried about. So you never want an interview for there to be obvious holes that everyone can pick up on, and that certainly was the case with that interview last night.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they were just, like you said, there were just holes in big storylines that were happening across baseball, things that needed to be addressed, things that people were talking about that the commissioner was not asked about. And, like you said, I get that, I agree with you that, there's the sense of it's opening day, we need to be positive and celebrate, but, baseball cannot detach itself from the complications that led to its return and right, the environment that it is now in. So I think, like you said, there's a way to do that where you can be optimistic but then at the end of the interview, still ask some of those questions that are about pressing matters. Yeah.
Right, and it's right. Just because the season started doesn't mean that those questions have gone away. And one of those questions that was finally answered just essentially minutes before first pitch was the new extended playoff format. You got 16 teams, 8 teams in each league, the top 2 teams from each division. Your thoughts, not necessarily on the optics of not knowing when opening day came around what the playoff format was going to look like. I mean, that's unfortunately unsurprising from the league's perspective right now. But what are your thoughts on the format the conclusion they came to in terms of a format for the playoffs?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. It's similar to what had been reportedly discussed back during the negotiations between the players and the owners several months ago. Mm-hmm. And at the time, the idea of expanding the playoff, when it came up, made sense to me. Just this idea that the season is going to be so short, crazy things are going to happen. Let's just embrace it, allow more teams in the playoffs, get teams that may be amongst the best in baseball, but for whatever reason don't have one of the best records, and get them in there so that they can have a chance in the postseason. And I still think that it is going to be a positive thing. I still am optimistic about it. I think there's a chance that with 16 teams making the playoffs, that's more than half of every major league team making the playoffs. There's going to be a chance that there's some teams that slip in there that really don't have any business being there. There could very well be some under 500 teams in the playoffs. But that being said, I think it's going to be fascinating. It's going to make the regular season more fascinating because basically every team except for maybe 5 has a reasonable chance of making the playoffs now. I think it was interesting, the idea that there's no first round buys at all in the playoffs.
Nope.
So even if you're the 1 or 2 seed in your league, you're still playing a best of 3 series. Now, if you're the first seed, you're playing, the 8th seed if you're the Yankees and you have the first seed in the AL, you're playing, the 8th seed in the AL. Let's say it's the, Rays or whatever it is. You're still playing a best of 3 series, which, I mean, we know how baseball is. The idea that the worst team can easily win 2 out of 3. It happens all the time in series throughout the season. So that's going to lead to some crazy results. I think it's going to lead to some chaos, and some people may be upset about it. But I also think it's going to lead to just some of the chaos may be negative, but also some of it's just going to be excitement, and anything can happen. And it's sort of just embrace the chaos of this season, and so I'm eager to see how it plays out.
Yeah, I think there's certainly an argument for that, but you would think that if you rest players right at the end of the season, that the Yankees should be able to take care of a series against the 8th best team in the AL when you've got Garrett Cole going one day and then Paxton and behind that lineup. It shouldn't be an issue, but that's certainly something I hadn't thought of in terms of people might be a little upset about that. But at the end of the day, win baseball games and you get to keep playing in the playoffs, which is ultimately the way it should be. You should just keep having to win baseball games. If I made you pick a team, so maybe it's a team that you weren't sold on them making the playoffs, but if they get in the playoffs, you could see them making some noise, or maybe it's just a team that benefits the most from an expanded playoff format like that. Do you have a team in mind that you could see making some noise in a playoff format, even if they had an outside chance of getting into a regular 10-team playoff?
Yeah, that's a good question. And, a lot of this, of course, is, as it always is in a baseball season, it's going to be timing and who's hot and who's healthy for teams when the playoffs come. But, I see a couple of teams that I'm interested in that regard. I see, particularly in the American League, I think the White Sox are a really interesting team. I certainly I'm not picking them to win the AL Central. There's, 2 teams that are on paper, and the Indians and Twins that are better than the White Sox. But the White Sox are a team that looks like they finally have the pieces to contend. They've got the emerging ace in Lucas Giolito. They've got the young hitting core, Tim Anderson, Yoan Moncada, Eloy Jimenez, Luis Robert. And then they went out this past offseason and they added some veteran players, Yasmani Grandal, Dallas Keuchel, Edwin Encarnacion. They clearly think that their time to start, contending for a playoff berth is now. And I think that that's a team that could be really interesting in the shortened season, whether or not they win that division or get the second spot in that division. Even if they don't, they're clearly the third best team in the division at worst. Mm-hmm. So I think that that's a team that if they're hot, if those young players are able to perform, particularly the hitters, that could be a team to watch out for in the postseason. Another one being the Angels. Again, this is a team that now with Anthony Rendon finally has some protection from Mike Trout. Obviously, he's not healthy to begin the season. Hopefully, won't be without him for long. But there's questions about the rotation, but that middle of the lineup is outstanding, and that's a team that I would be interested in if they can make the postseason to see what they could do in October for sure.
So just recently over at 110sportsmedia.com, you put out your predictions for the for this shortened season. I won't give it away. I'll let you tell us. But who ultimately do you have representing each league? And as of right now, who's your World Series champion?
Yeah, so I went the common choice, the obvious, the big choice for the National League. I didn't go too outside the box there. I went with the Dodgers. I mean, this team is just clearly the best team in the National League on paper. I mean, strange things have happened. There's no guarantees in baseball, of course, especially in a season like this. But it's just hard to find any holes in the Dodgers right now in that roster. They've got the pitching. They've got the young pitching. They've got the veteran pitching. They've got the superstar hitters. They've got depth on the hitting end. They've got a pretty good bullpen and the ability to add guys at the trade deadline, the resources. So it's just hard to find any holes in this Dodgers roster. I couldn't not pick them to win the National League. The American League, I went with the bolder choice, the obvious choice there being the Yankees, and I certainly don't think that's a bad choice. I mean, on paper, I can't really argue with the Yankees at all. Like you said, the big question is always health with the Yankees. Maybe the 60-game season will help with that, and I certainly would not at all be surprised to see them win the American League. I went with the Twins, though. This is a team that I'm just really high on personally. This is a team that set a single-season home run record last year and then added a guy, Josh Donaldson, coming off a 37-homer season. So this offense, 1 through 9, I think is the deepest in all of baseball. Then they improved the rotation with the additions of some veteran pitchers, Rich Hill, Kenta Maeda. I'm really high on this Twins team. The bullpen's good, too. So I have the Twins actually winning the American League over the Yankees, over the Astros, and then my World Series winner is the Dodgers. Again, I just couldn't go against a team that just seems to have every base covered. That roster's just so good, and so I went with the Dodgers to win the World Series.
Certainly can't argue with that one there, and I think it's the Dodgers have an immense amount of pressure to win the World Series this year, but it's certainly getting to the World Series is nothing they haven't done before. As for the Yankees, that is something that with this roster, with this core of players, with Judge and Stanton, it's something they haven't done yet, and still that health continues to be a question mark. And that Twins team, in terms of talent, is certainly capable of getting the World Series. So I can't argue with you there either. Chris, it's always a pleasure. Thanks for coming on to talk opening day in baseball with me.
Absolutely, Josh. Thanks for having me on.
That's Chris Brown, 110 Sports. Sports' baseball expert. Follow him on Twitter at cbrownsports. Pretty much anything on our 110sportsmedia.com site that has to do with baseball is written about him. So he's a must follow on Twitter, and go check out the things that he's written for us over on the site. Coming up next, I'm going to talk about my 2019-20 individual awards for the NBA season, who I think should get those awards: MVP, Defensive Player of the Year, Rookie of the Year, Sixth Man, Most Improved, and Coach of the Year. We'll do that next on the JMULL Show on 110sportsmedia.com. Welcome back to the JMULL show on a Friday. Let's get right into this. We don't have too much time left in the show, so we're going to jump right into my 2019-2020 NBA individual awards, starting with MVP. Listen, it's pretty simple in my opinion. It's Giannis. Okay? He's the best player on the best team in the NBA thus far this season. It's not necessarily a commentary on who I think is going to win the finals. It's not a commentary on who I think is the best player in the world right now. It might be Giannis. He's getting closer and closer every day. But in terms of performance this season on an elite basketball team who has an elite margin of victory, it's Giannis. Best player on the best team, 29.6 points, 13.7 rebounds, 5.8 assists per game. He's got a block and a steal in there as well. And it's why he's also the defensive player of the year. The Bucks are an incredibly good defensive team. Elite defensive team. And it's one of the reasons why they're even better than they were last year. They just became an elite defensive team. And yes, they have Giannis and yes, they have Middleton, but on paper, they're not a phenomenal three-point shooting team. And they don't have... To be honest, they don't have a roster that looks like a team that's going to have an incredible margin of victory over the season, but it's incredible. And part of the reason why is the defense and why this team got so much better this year. Giannis is the best defender on the best defensive team in the NBA. So he's the defensive player of the year. For the same reason that he's the MVP. I think this is pretty simple. I think we're overthinking it a little too much if you go with anybody else. It's Giannis, and I don't really think there's... I mean, of course, I'm not going to call you stupid if you think LeBron is the guy who should be the MVP. But in my opinion, it's Giannis, and he's just been a step ahead of everybody else this season on both ends of the floor for the team that has been steps ahead of everybody else on both ends of the floor. Rookie of the year is Ja Morant, and here's where I am willing to call you an idiot if you think Zion Williamson should be the Rookie of the Year. Not only is he not the Rookie of the Year, he wouldn't come in second either. He played 19 games. 19. Even if he played the rest of the season, it would be less than 35 games. You can't be telling if the season had been suspended. And here's the other thing. Ja Morant pushes winning now. 17.6 points, 6.9 assists, 3.5 rebounds. The Grizzlies are in the driver's seat for the 8th seed because of Ja Morant. The Pelicans season winding up the way that it has nothing to do with Zion Williamson. He played 19 games. They were 10-9 in that stretch. 500 basketball, which is fine and technically is better than, and is of course better than what they had been up until that point. A team that's well under 500. But you can't tell me that what Ja Morant did in 59 games isn't better than what Zion Williamson did in 19. You just can't tell me that. I refuse to believe it. Zion 23, 6.8, and 2.2 in 19 games. You just can't. You can't tell me that he's had the better season. And the Grizzlies are the team that are in the driver's seat for the 8th seed, not the Pelicans. So it's Ja, and you can't... There's just no argument for Zion. There just isn't. I'm sorry. Sixth man is Montrezl Harrell. He's been better than Lou Williams this season. He's 18.6 points, 7.1 rebounds. He's just been better than Lou this year. Lou's been great, but Montrez has been really, really good for that team. Hopefully he can get back to the bubble. Had to leave for, I believe it was an emergency family issue So hopefully everything is okay with his family and he's able to come back to the Clippers for that playoff push. But I think it's Montrezl Harrell. He's been phenomenal this season and is one of the reasons why the Clippers are so scary, because he's been so good and will be on the floor during crunch time for LA once we get to the playoffs. Most improved is Brandon Ingram. Brandon Ingram is the reason that the Pelicans are better this year than they were last year. Brandon Ingram. 18.3 points last year to 24.3 points this year. Assists and rebounds went up by 1.2 and 1.3 on average this season. His shooting percentage went down a little bit, but he's taking like 4 or 5 more shots per game, and it only went down marginally. And it was a decrease you'd expect with the uptick in shots that he saw. And his 3-point percentage, taking like 4 more threes per game on average, went up 5.5%. Went from 33% to 38%. And so there's no question in my mind it's Brandon Ingram. And there's certainly an argument for guys like Jason Tatum just because he was so much better than he was last year. But I think it's Brandon Ingram. He's been phenomenal. He was phenomenal from the jump for New Orleans, and in my opinion is the catalyst of if the Pelicans can track down the 8 seed, not Zion Williamson. He's the best player on that team right now, and they're going to need him to be the 24.3 points per game guy he was this season if the Pelicans are going to track down the Grizzlies, especially without Zion in the bubble right now, attending also to emergency family issues, and hopefully his family and the people around him are okay and healthy as well. And then the coach of the year is Nick Nurse. You lose your entire perimeter on defense. You lose Kawhi Leonard, you lose Danny Green, sort of part of the core of a championship team, and you have a better record than last year. The question about this team is if they're closer to the Kawhi Raptors or the DeMar DeRozan and Kyle Lowry Raptors, who really weren't taken seriously as a title contender ever. That's yet to be seen, but with the injuries they had, losing one of the best players in the world, and then you're a team that, isn't just a feel-good story, but really is a team that has the numbers of a title contender. You have a go-to scorer, you have Kyle Lowry, Fred VanVleet, 2 guys that have been really good this season. You've got experience in Marc Gasol, you got an elite defender in OG Anunoby. It makes sense. It really does. But what Nick Nurse was able to do with a team that was banged up for most of the year and be as good as they were is impressive, and Budenholzer would be a close second. But Nurse is my coach of the year, and in my opinion, it's not even that close. We're going to take a quick break, and then we'll go to FYI to wrap up the show. You're watching the JMULL Show on 110sportsmedia.com. Welcome back to the JMULL Show on a Friday. Wrapping up the show real quick. We got it. We did it. We made it to the end of the week. FY number 1, for your information, there are 14 MLB games today. I know you might have thought that it was the case, but believe it or not, after the 2 games last night, they're going to have more games, 60 more games for each team, roughly, give or take. Some good games today. You got several games on ESPN, on national television to watch. So that's good. Awesome. We got baseball all weekend, which is, right now is a novelty. So we're going to we're gonna hold on to that we've actually got a lot of live sports this weekend. On national television, you got the Mets and the Braves on ESPN, the Brewers and Cubs on ESPN, and the Angels and A's on ESPN. So you got baseball to watch today. You got baseball to watch all weekend, and it's a very exciting time. We got baseball now, and we're getting ever so close to the NBA. And then FYI number 2, of course, FYI number 2, for your information, the Seattle Kraken, the Crackheads. I kind of want to be a fan just so I could be one of the Crackheads. I'm not sure how I feel about the name, to be honest with you, but the Seattle Kraken, the newest member of the NHL. It's a pretty funny name, but the logo's dope and their colorway is dope. And then, of course, we'll come back on the 110 Sports Network next week. My show, the JMULL Show, 11 a.m. Eastern on Monday, and then Touchline Talk with Josh Doring, 11 a.m. Eastern on Tuesday, and Around the Bases with Chris Brown, 1 p.m. Eastern on Tuesday. I'm sure he'll break down everything that happens in Major League Baseball over the weekend and the start of the MLB season, but that's all we have for you. It's another week gone of the JMULL Show. Thank you so much for being a part of it. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you back here same time, 11 a.m. Eastern on Monday.